Hello, welcome to Nakti by j.N.S. And today we're continuing with the Black American series, which is part 6. And it covers the Jim Crow era, which is 1896 through 1964. So let's begin. So as we know, Black Americans did make some gains during the Reconstruction period because they had no choice but to build their own towns and their own cities. But white Southerners forcefully regained control of state and local governments and passed a series of Jim Crow laws that enforced racial segregation in public spaces such as schools, transportation, restaurants, restrooms, fountains, sports, anything in the public atmosphere. It was segregated based on race. And these laws were upheld by the Supreme Court decision in the 1896 Plessy versus Ferguson's case, which declared separate but equal as constitutional. This ruling set the precedent for legalizing segregation, and Jim Crow laws further institutionalized the economic and social inequality of Black Americans. In reality, facilities built for Black Americans were underfunded and ultimately not up to par with their white counterparts because the white counterparts had 400-year head start off of their free labor. So of course these facilities are going to look different and have inherent inequality. So eventually the separation of public spaces was viewed as inherently unequal due to these lack of resources in the Black community and the allocation of government funds. So Jim Crow restrictions further marginalized the Black American and played a very big role in our history, though it is not our entire history. And even today, we can still feel the remnants of the Jim Crow era in some aspects of life, such as voting, such as even schools today, public schools. We can see it in many aspects, even in the way the grocery stores are set up, as far as the desert areas and the desert food areas in the Black community. So this is still affecting us in some ways, but we have made strides to diminish and abolish Jim Crow as much as possible. The actual details of Jim Crow will be covered in other parts, because some of the issues that we dealt with, such as like the housing and healthcare, those need its own separate videos because it transcended past the Jim Crow era and continued into the 80s, the 90s, and still to this day. So this is just letting you know the Jim Crow era itself, from 1896 through 1964, of the basis of what it meant in the law of Plessy versus Ferguson. So it was just based off a separate but equal as constitutional, and that bled into many areas of our lives. So this is part 6 of the Black American series. Stay tuned, because right now, like I keep saying, we're going through the history of what we went through, and then we're going to talk about our contributions and what are our values and what do our culture look like what do we like to do, and so we will get there. We will get to a more codifying of our actual culture, of our actual value system and principles. We're going to talk about our contributions to science and inventing, as well as obviously music. We're going to get into a whole array of things, but we're going to need to understand the history of the Black American, the philosophy of what it is to be a Black American. What does a Black American look like? What has the Black American contributed and invented? And then what do they like to do today? So we're going to cover the whole gamut. So stay tuned, even though I know we have a real painful history, and even like doing some of these videos, doing the Jim Crow and talking about the KKK, that's obviously painful for me. So even in my voice, you could feel like this anxiousness. Like it's not like it makes me sad to actually have to do these videos, but we need to collate our history, and it needs to be someone that cares about collating it, even if it's just a synopsis, and putting something together to just briefly show society, as well as the next generation, and the history of a Black American. A lot of people do not know the history of Black Americans. They just look at the news, they look at a book with one chapter or two, but they don't know the actual essence, and they don't really need to. But even just for ourselves, we are under attack as far as getting our true voice out there, getting our true history out there. So it's better if we do it ourselves and just put it up there for forever. So that's why the Black American series is being done, because information needs to be upgraded. It's not just enough to just put the history out there, but where do you go from there? And what does it look like today? And what are the politics and ideologies permeating the consciousness of our group today? And it looks very different than when it did in the 80s and what Black Americans were doing in the 60s. We're on a whole nother wavelength. So that needs to be addressed, and it needs to be documented. You know, the whole gamut of our whole 700-year experience here. And as you know, I did the Black Man series, I did the Queen Mothership series, detailing pretty much 100,000 years of general African history, which the diaspora would be included in that, including the Black American. So bringing you this information because, for one, it's interesting for me. I honestly enjoy doing it. I don't get paid to do it. I just spend my time researching, putting this stuff together, honestly out of joy. And then, you know, for the future generations, I do have little young people in my family that I do make them watch these videos, you know, and that's as simple as that. So stay tuned for part 7, and I'm gonna talk to y'all later. Bye.